As we just discussed on the other side of the break, with limited doses of COVID vaccine available, the debate over who gets vaccinated next continues. The CDC has recommended that meatpacking and poultry processing plant workers should be next in line. Meatpacking plants were host to some of the worst outbreaks in the country, with most employees working long hours in cramped conditions. According to the Food and Environment Action Network, which has been documented cases, nearly 66,000 meatpacking and food processing workers have been infected with the virus, and nearly 300 have died. According to ProPublica, workers at a Tyson plant in Waterloo, Iowa, felt pressured to show up or risk losing their jobs. That plant is now facing a wrongful death lawsuit filed on behalf of the families of workers who died after being exposed to the virus. The suit claims that managers were downplaying the dangers of the virus, calling it the glorified flu, while simultaneously placing bets on how many workers would get sick. Tyson responded, saying its top priority is the health and safety of its employees and that its protective measures meet or exceed official guidance. Despite the mounting death toll in various facilities, Trump signed an executive order in April classifying meat plants as essential infrastructure that must remain open.
They're big companies, but they're now being treated fairly. They're thrilled. And that whole bottleneck is broken up.
So the Defense Production Act protects them from
liability?
Well,
we use it. That's what we did. We used it, and it helps them greatly to do what they have to do, because they're ready to do it, but they needed some help.
Last week, Senate Republicans dropped their demands that liability protection for companies be included in COVID relief legislation. But it remains a top priority for Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Joining me now is Mark Lauritsen, Vice President of the United Food and Commercial Workers Union. And Mark, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it. This is something I've been wanting to talk about for quite a while. If you look at places like Greeley, Colorado, or these meat packing facilities in places like Iowa and Mississippi, it felt like these were dangerous places for people to work. Are these dangerous places for people to be working?
Well, Joy, thanks for having me. But I would start by saying meat packing and food processing has always been a hard job. And COVID-19 has actually exposed the fact that not only is it hard work, but at times it can be kind of dangerous, really dangerous. I know that you spoke of 300 deaths in the industry. Just in our union alone, over 130 of our sisters and brothers weren't able to celebrate the holidays with their families because they passed from this. So the industry's always been tough, but I think that we have done a good job of pushing the employers, and at times it felt like we were one of the few people standing up to the Trump administration when they started doing these silly things like the executive order forcing plants to stay open while workers were dying. It kind of showed you where the Trump administration's priority.
Well, I mean, Republicans in general seem to believe that the only aid that anybody needs is to go to work and sort of get on the wheel. And you know, obviously people in meatpacking plants can't do that from home. So they and people who work at places like Amazon and people who work in close quarters to make people who can stay home's lives more comfortable have been more vulnerable. You've got BuzzFeed reporting that 45 meat processing plants recorded at least 50 confirmed COVID-19 cases. Only 20 plants actually ordered full-scale testing for their employees. And on this subject of managers at this Iowa facility placing bets on how many would get sick, one terminated manager said the office pool was spontaneous and intended to boost morale. So they're trying to boost fellow managers' morale. How are workers generally treated in these facilities when it comes to safety from COVID?
Well, let me speak to you about the plants that we represent and that are unionized. And I can't speak about what's happening in those non-union facilities. But where we represent folks, we were the union that pushed to get the enhanced PPE. We've been working with our employers to do things like expand the common areas so we can get people room to social distance. We were the ones that were talking with the employers about the ventilation system, all at the same time that the Trump administration and OSHA had basically abdicated the field. We're the union that still, to this day, is pushing this administration, this OSHA, and will push the next administration to enact an emergency temporary standard, not just for packing house workers, but for all workers across the country, because OSHA needs to do their job. And so when we look back at the failures of what happened in the COVID-19 pandemic, the first mistake that was made is that OSHA abdicated their responsibility to keep these workers safe And that left it to our union to basically duke it out with every company individually to make sure our members were safe.
And for those who are familiar with that, OSHA is the Occupational Safety and Health Organization. They're supposed to protect workers on the job. But, you know, given situations like this, or we could do the same segment about Amazon and all of these other places where people have to work in close quarters to, again, make our comfy lives possible. ProPublica found that for more than a dozen years, critical businesses like meatpackers have been warned that a pandemic was coming. Records show that these companies relied on wait and see as their approach rather than do something about it. In one example, 11 years ago, the Department of Labor encouraged employers to stockpile masks for immediate exposure risk jobs that include those with frequent close contact, close to 6 feet exposures, et cetera. So and I'm quite sure this is something that's come up in your union as well. What do you make of the fact that Mitch McConnell, the Senate Majority Leader, wants to give liability protection to companies like the ones that your workers work in, so they can't be sued?
Well, let's start. The liability waivers that Senator McConnell's asking for is just wrong. It's not just wrong in the meatpacking industry. It's wrong for workers across this country in every aspect of work, because employers need to be held accountable for what they do and what they don't do. And in this case, when OSHA abdicated their responsibility, you know, it turned everything upside down, where there was no baseline for people and employers to know this is what has to happen inside our facilities. So when OSHA abdicated, it left a lot of people out there to do whatever they want to do. And right now, our legal system is what's going to protect those folks. And the fact that they need to have a union pushing behind them. You know, look, it was when you look back in the history of this pandemic, when OSHA abdicated their responsibility, it was this union and employers, they had to sit down and figure it out on their own what has to happen here. All the expertise in the field left, and we had to fill that vacuum.
Yeah, well, good people make good government, and good unions make for a good workplace. And Americans keep learning that over and over and over and over again. Mark Lauritsen, thank you very much. We're going to keep